In this episode, we focus on a skill that separates wishful planning from real resilience, identifying recovery alternatives and coordinating practical recovery strategies. When systems fail or operations are disrupted, it is tempting to assume there is only one correct way to recover, usually the most familiar way. But real disasters rarely cooperate with your preferred plan, and recovery often succeeds because teams can choose between workable alternatives when the first option is unavailable or too slow. Recovery alternatives are different ways to restore capability, and recovery strategies are the coordinated choices about which alternatives to use, in what order, and under what constraints. For brand new learners, the key idea is simple. You do not want a single fragile path back to normal. You want multiple paths with clear decision points. This lesson teaches how to think through those options, how to judge them realistically, and how to coordinate them so the organization moves forward instead of arguing in circles. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful starting point is to define what recovery means in a way that is broader than turning systems back on. Recovery is restoring the organization's ability to deliver essential outcomes, which might happen through technology restoration, process changes, alternate resources, or a temporary reduction in scope. Sometimes recovery means restoring full service quickly, but often it means restoring a minimum viable level first and improving from there. This is why alternatives matter, because one option might restore full service slowly while another restores partial service quickly. The right choice depends on what the business needs most urgently and what constraints exist in the moment. For example, if a customer portal is down, the organization might temporarily shift to handling requests through a different channel while the portal is repaired. That shift is an alternative strategy that preserves essential outcomes even if the primary system is unavailable. To identify alternatives well, you first need to understand the goal you are trying to achieve, not just the system you are trying to fix. If the goal is to process payments, the alternative might be a manual method, a different service provider, or a temporary change in business rules, not just restoring the exact payment platform. If the goal is to maintain safety operations, the alternative might involve prioritizing certain monitoring functions while postponing analytics or reporting. Beginners often focus on restoring the exact technology they see, but recovery strategies often focus on maintaining functions. This functional view opens up more options, and it also helps you coordinate with business leaders who care about outcomes rather than infrastructure details. When you define the goal clearly, you can evaluate alternatives based on how well they meet that goal under real conditions. A major category of recovery alternatives is restoration location, meaning where services will run after a disruption. The primary site might be unavailable due to power loss, flooding, or building damage, so alternatives could include an alternate site, a different region, or a temporary arrangement that uses external facilities. What matters for beginners is not the technology specifics, but the idea that different locations have different risks and different readiness levels. An alternate site might be well prepared but far away, which affects staffing and logistics. A regional alternative might avoid local disaster impact, but may require changes in connectivity or access. Coordinating this choice involves understanding what dependencies must move with the service, such as identity systems, network routes, and data availability. A recovery strategy should not assume that moving a service is easy. It should treat it as a planned decision with known requirements. Another key category is data recovery alternatives, which concern how you restore information to a usable state. Data alternatives can involve restoring from backups, using replicated copies, reconstructing data from transaction logs, or even re-entering data manually for a limited period. Each alternative has trade-offs involving timeliness, completeness, and integrity. Restoring from backups might be slower, but reliable if backups are protected and consistent. Using replicated copies might be faster, but could carry forward corruption or malicious changes if the replication included bad data. Manual reentry might allow the business to operate in a limited way while systems recover, but it adds labor and increases the chance of mistakes. Coordinating a data recovery strategy means choosing an approach that balances speed with correctness, because incorrect data can harm the organization even after systems appear recovered. A third category is application and service recovery alternatives, which include ways to restore or substitute the software capabilities the organization relies on. Sometimes a service can be replaced temporarily with a simpler substitute that offers fewer features but meets essential needs. Sometimes a critical function can run in a degraded mode, such as limiting transactions, restricting access to fewer users, or postponing non-essential processing. For beginners, an analogy is a store operating with only one register while others are repaired, or limiting purchases to reduce load during a disruption. These choices might feel like compromises, but they can preserve the most important outcomes while reducing stress on recovery teams. Coordinating these strategies requires agreement across technical and business groups, because changing service behavior affects users and may require communications, policy adjustments, and oversight. The key is to plan these alternatives in advance so they are not invented under panic. Resource alternatives are another often overlooked area, and they include staffing, expertise, and access. In disasters, the right people may be unavailable, and recovery plans that rely on a single expert often fail. Alternatives can include cross-training, documented procedures that others can follow, and agreements for external support. Access alternatives also matter because recovery frequently requires privileged access, and some access systems may be down. An organization might need controlled break glass access, alternate authentication methods, or pre-approved emergency roles to perform recovery actions safely. Coordinating resource alternatives is about ensuring that recovery can proceed even when conditions are imperfect, while still maintaining control and accountability. Beginners should recognize that recovery is a human process as much as a technical process, and alternative staffing and access paths are part of practical recovery. Once you have a set of alternatives, the next step is to evaluate them against constraints so you do not choose an option that looks good on paper but fails in reality. The most common constraints include time, meaning how quickly the business needs functionality, resources, meaning what people and capabilities are available, and verification, meaning how you will confirm the alternative is safe and correct. Evaluation also includes risk, because some alternatives increase exposure. For example, temporarily broadening access might speed recovery but increase the chance of misuse or error. Temporarily disabling controls might reduce friction but increase the chance of data loss or integrity problems. A practical recovery strategy is one that improves outcomes while keeping risk within acceptable bounds. Facilitation in this stage means helping the group be honest about trade-offs and choose options that can actually be executed. Coordination is where many recovery efforts struggle, because multiple teams may pursue different recovery paths simultaneously without alignment. One group might restore a service in one location, while another group modifies network routing in a way that conflicts. Another group might restore data from one point in time, while a business team continues manual processing that creates new data that must later be merged. Coordinating practical recovery strategies means establishing a shared picture of priorities, dependencies, and sequencing. It also means defining decision points. When do we switch from one alternative to another, and who approves that change? Coordination requires clear communication channels, shared status reporting, and a way to resolve conflicts quickly. Even for beginners, the key idea is that recovery is not only about choosing good alternatives, it is about ensuring everyone chooses the same plan at the same time. A particularly important coordination topic is managing partial recovery, because recovery is often incremental. You might restore identity services first, then core networking, then critical applications, and finally supporting services. During that process, some parts of the organization may regain capability before others, and that can create confusion if people assume everything is back. A practical strategy includes clear definitions of what is restored, what is still degraded, and what users should do differently. It also includes coordination with security, because partial restoration can create temporary weak points, such as services running without full monitoring or with limited logging. Verification steps should confirm that the restored parts are functioning and trustworthy before the organization ramps up usage. Managing partial recovery prevents a second failure caused by returning to full load too soon. It also helps maintain trust, because users are more tolerant of limitations when the organization communicates clearly and consistently. Finally, it is important to capture why the organization chose a particular recovery strategy, because that reasoning becomes valuable during and after the event. During the event, reasoning helps leadership defend decisions and adjust them as conditions change. After the event, reasoning helps the organization learn, refine alternatives, and improve coordination for next time. This is where lessons learned connect directly to strategy improvement. If an alternative was too slow, you might invest in making it faster. If it was risky, you might add controls that make it safer. If it required unavailable staff, you might improve cross-training or documentation. A mature recovery program does not assume one perfect strategy exists. It builds a portfolio of alternatives and strengthens the ability to coordinate them. Over time, the organization becomes less dependent on luck and more dependent on practiced decision-making. Identifying recovery alternatives and coordinating practical strategies is the work of building options and then choosing among them with discipline. You begin by focusing on the essential outcome you need to restore, not just the system that failed, and that opens up alternatives across location, data, services, and resources. You evaluate those alternatives against time, resource, and verification constraints, and you make trade-offs explicit so the strategy is realistic and defensible. Coordination ensures that teams act in alignment, manage dependencies and partial recovery intelligently, and communicate status in a way that prevents confusion and rework. When an organization plans for multiple workable paths and practices how to choose between them, recovery becomes faster, safer, and far less chaotic under real-world pressure.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.